So I want to talk here briefly about something that at various points in my life is something I've cared about, and at various points I haven't really cared about, and that's making music. I really didn't listen to a whole lot of music when I was a kid until I found Weird Al, and oddly enough, the way I found Weird Al was as a child, like on the playground, it had crossed my mind to do parodies, and I didn't really know about the idea of pop parody existing so much as just little jingles, like maybe Jingle Bells, Batman Smells. Like that was the extent of parody I knew of. I didn't know that people were actively writing song parodies and being artists doing it. And so I'd mentioned it, and the first idea I had was a song called "Eat It," and I mentioned that to someone. And they mentioned, there's somebody who has made one of those, is Weird Al. And I'm like, I never heard of this person. But that pretty much cut short my time thinking I might be a parodist. I just became a fan of his and had a lot of my sense of humor rooted in it, but never took up the cause that I would be doing it because he did it much better than mine. And so that's kind of maybe a cautionary tale to people who do things too well, is that maybe other people will not do it. So in a way that turned out to actually be kind of common for nerds at this time, I listened mostly to Weird Al and music from video games. I've met other people like that who stayed that way for their adult life. And video games had really interesting music to me. I'm not sure if I liked it because I liked the games and I associated it with it, and so or just there's something naturally appealing to me about electronic music that I would have liked it even if I hadn't been introduced to it by way of video games. But there were also, as I got older and was going to college and stuff, and just there were these demo scene people who were doing music and these trackers, and it was kind of a poor man's sampler. It was a program that would run your computer with the MIDI notes and then some 8-bit or maybe even sometimes 16-bit samples and a few tracks, and some of these guys were composing really good music with it, and I didn't get the good tools to make the music until I was already too busy to be doing it really in college. That's where my inspiration was coming from, and so I figured, as I went along, I'd pick up musical instruments, and that's something I would buy with money, and with this idea that I would use it to make music, but really I was kind of a poser and just kind of had it. And it wasn't until I started working at Microsoft and had a coworker, Paul Kwiatkowski, who had a lot of experience working in recording studios. His dad had done production for Rush or something. He was a award-winning Canadian broadcast company music producer, and so Paul had to do a lot of slave labor for his dad and picked up a lot of what how to do good recording. So he had done a bunch of manual splicing of tape. He was used to doing it the hard way, and so it was very liberating for him to kind of be using the computer technology, whereas for me it was all like it's always kind of intimidated me. And I do like to point out that, sometimes when you give people really psychologically damaging tools, like this cartridge for making music on the Commodore, I'd just sit there and puzzle at it, and it would say things like square and triangle, and that doesn't sound like a triangle at all. And I think it would have made sense to me then if someone sat down and explained it, but instead I got some mysterious object. I think that when you get such things, they can do more damage than having nothing at all. So I also felt that way about this Portasound PSS 680. It's the most expensive one at Sears. It's still kind of a toy and not something you can accomplish things with. Even the keyboard demos that are in it are done by people on sequencers completely separately, and then they just program it into the keyboard like, oh, well, technically. But here we were in 1997 or whenever. This is about the closest version of Cakewalk I can find. That was the software that Paul used, so that's what we decided we would do, and we went out to Guitar Center or wherever and bought 2 synthesizers once. Each of us got one, Roland JP8000 and a Alesis QSR, and we decided that we would take take Cakewalk and play. And this is what Cakewalk looked like in those days. I had to look around. It was pre-YouTube, so there aren't a lot of people with videos of it. But it was serviceable. And I'm not gonna play all the songs or anything. They're on the archive. But this was Helpful Corn, named after a joke in a Beavis and Butthead, and it has the two voices kind of competing, this harsh Kurzweil K2500 sound that I had being put up against the airy lightness of the JP8000, and I always thought that was kind of like a Teletubbies. I've envisioned Teletubbies intermixing with some guy's kind of dreary office life, so sort of like it would be intercut with the Golden Path, but then it would keep going back as the two aspects became more interwoven until finally the two worlds collide, so that the Teletubbies are now in this office, you know, that kind of thing. And we wound up making a album of sorts, just I guess a collection of songs that we called Romantic Bulldozer. That was based on a name that someone had given a guy on the Microsoft chat boards, where they said he was a romantic bulldozer because of the way that he tried to date, and people liked that phrase, so Romantic Bulldozer became the title. And yeah, there's about 7 or 8 songs. I guess I could tell a little story about each one. This one I think was the magnum opus. I'll let you hear the opening line from one of the cast of characters.
On the good side of love is the ultimate fulfillment, and when you're totally fulfilled, it's as if you're on the planet Z of funness.
So neither Paul and I sang or anything like that, certainly at the time. I mean, I've done a little since, but the general kinds of music that we tended to be aiming for was samples with techno, kind of the Chemical Brothers and Crystal Method kind of stuff that was out. And so we were always on, looking for a good novel sample, and this video was a gold mine. Found it in the free rentals community section. Blockbuster, for some reason, when there were such things as Blockbuster videos, had a little section of just videos that you could rent, and as long as you didn't bring them back late, they were free. And so we would just take those from the community service section and record them off of the VCR to load in as samples. And this was some kind of video that like Ted Danson and Justine Bateman and Jason Bateman wound up making for some reason, whose point was to sort of mix in this motivational speaker guy named Saul and his advice on what mature relationships are about to the teenagers, and kind of mixing that up with all this kind of don't think that you have to be pressured to have sex in order to have a relationship if you're in high school. So it was like that, and it had so many quotes from these kids that were just ridiculous. The Planet Z of funness was the starting one, so that's how I got the name Planet Z. And it also ends with him wistfully going, Planet Z, yeah, which was something he said. It's wonderful. And this song came out, I think, really well on a number of aspects. The technical side, Paul was really working pretty hard on that with the little thumpy beats and experimenting. It sounds good, and I kind of took more to the structure and okay, how are we going to put this together as a story, and getting the samples in there. So that was a sort of a creative partnership, but he was doing most of the synthesizers on that one.
Just here to remind you that you do not have to stop the tape to talk about love.
Yeah.
Paul and I weren't dating anyone at the time of making this music, so one thing that we thought would be kind of a crossover interest would be to try calling these stranger voicemail personals and see what messages girls had left and record them, which would, if you wanted to listen to them more than once, you could, because you'd record it and you didn't have to go back and play it and pay for it. But also you'd have a recording in case there was any interesting samples. And so that phone number you hear at the beginning of the song, Stranger, is that number. And apparently the Stranger no longer does that and has some other thing that they do. So that was the city paper, by the way, if you don't know what the Stranger is. It's a city paper in Seattle. And we did record it, and then no one, I think that maybe it would have been interesting had they said something interesting, or someone had gone in some kind of rant to turn that into a song, like maybe some girl talking about all the things that, a man has to do this and a man has to do that. But like some interesting ranty quote that a random person might have. But we didn't have anything like that. And the most interesting thing was really just kind of the random noises that people would make, like sighing or, whatever was on the voicemail. And we decided to just kind of to avoid getting in trouble by using, non-published people and publishing their remarks, to just do little sounds and noises off of it. So the song has some of that. It also has kind of a break in it that sounds a little bit like Recoil, Alan Wilder's band, kind of purposefully see some of that effect. But it came off pretty well, I think, as a song. And it ends with this sudden disconnection of the phone line. The dial tones were generated on the computer. That's not a recording of pressing the dial tones on a phone. There was actually some kind of thing in Cakewalk where you could make a dial tone at a certain frequency. We just typed in the frequencies from the dial tone chart. So I said neither of us were dating anyone at the time. I guess there was some issue where I had this fight with a girl. I guess Paul had some issue as well, asking someone out and then it not going all that well. And we were both kind of in a bad mood, and so we took this kind of dark sample off of it was a racetrack, and it was like, whoa, whoa, and we kind of slowed it down to this beat and called it Anthem for the Defeated Idealist in our angsty music here. And then it has this guy going, yo, which is actually just some kind of, because we'd slowed it down, it just kind of fell out of how that crowd at the racetrack sounded. And then there's this other person who's yelling, come on baby, one more. And so we kind of story-wise turned it around so that it was as if there was a singer who was going yo, and then the people who are screaming are asking for another yo from him. But that is not the way that the racetrack was. And I'd gotten this, I can't find a picture of the actual CD cover that I recognize. I think it was called The Ultimate Sound Effects Library. This could just be those guys rebranding, but the packaging looks different than what I remember. And one thing about this, I'll kind of let the music play a little bit for you, is that it had this very Delirium-inspired break in it that was my favorite part of the song, so I'll let it play. That bit, yeah, that almost could have been off of something like Semantic Spaces from Delirium. Which drives on the point that I don't know that we were really thinking that much of having an original sound. Our goal was mostly just making stuff that was fun. There was not usually a big plan. Just like, oh, here's this new synthesizer, here's this new sound, what can you do with that? And then mixing in some samples. And a good example of just recording for the sake of, hey, here's a different kind of synthesizer was The Thump, this song that got the title The Thump because it goes The Thump. It was because Paul had gotten this Trinity physical modeling synthesizer. And the idea behind physical modeling synthesizers was that they were actually trying to have these different models, like the model of a string instrument or the model of a wind instrument, and you, instead of tuning it based on the usual parameters of like, oh, I want this to be higher pitched or squeaky, and the oscillators that you would use to do other kinds of synthesis or sampling, this was actually trying to mimic the instrument. So you could sit there and say, well, what if I had a string and it was made out of this material that was heavy and it had a certain length, and then I made a big opening and I plucked the string over it. It's like the instrument would run a mathematical model to try and give you the sound that would make, and even though it's not going to be 100% what you would get, it supposedly would make interesting sounds. And then you could say, oh, and as I pull this lever, it will make it longer and shorter. It'll change the density of the string while you're playing, which is something you couldn't do with real objects. So The Thump was one of the songs that was just kind of trying to exercise the Trinity. A few other things thrown in, but not too much to say about it. It sounds okay. And most of these we would work on at Paul's apartment. I guess that Helpful Corn, the initial one, we did at my place, but he had kind of the better setup, and so it was rare that I would take a file home and tinker with it. This one didn't. This one came out a bit noisy. Like, you really kind of want to go back and take out the noise, but it did have a break in it. I was listening to a lot of Brian Transeau BT, and I put in this thing, like I took the file home and messed with it myself, because I could do this song on my own. I had all the synthesizers for it, so I just want to play that for you. The title of APM came from the phrase automatic propaganda machine. I don't really remember what the quote was. I think it might have been something Charles Simone said, where it was like, oh, if you could do this and you could do that, then basically what you've come up with is an automatic propaganda machine. And as we were always on the lookout for statements, we did that. But automatic propaganda machine was too long for a file name, so it was just APM. And it has a quote in it where it says that train is now leaving Dublin Centre Station. Please move your head away from the edge of the platform, or whatever. And so that's in there too. And that's kind of all I've got of the Brian and Paul collaborations. There were some other projects that were started. We definitely had more of those videos, like Say Yes to Life by Lauren, who was this guy who would sing about saying yes to life, and another one called Nightmare on Drug Street, and it had a kid who does cocaine, and he has a heart attack and dies, and he's just this very young black kid, but his friend talks him into it because he's a studious kid who is peer pressured into it, because his friend holds up a pipe and goes, "This is crack, and this is what you smoke it in," and the kid is reluctant, but his friend says, "Come on, if you want to be a scientist, you got to experiment." And so that was a pretty good quote. I thought we could have used that in a song. There was also another one that was making fun of these Bacon Wave commercials, and it was funny because it was bacon.wave, just .wav being audio file format. And yeah, there were probably a number of projects in there somewhere that had little tunes just like Anytime, but the files that are in the archive are just the ones that made it onto an album that got pressed and printed with a CD cover by Paul's dad at some point. And I don't have that CD anymore, but I do have the files.
Golden boy. Golden boy. Golden boy.
Golden boy.
And the song Golden Boy is something that Paul did. I had nothing to do with it, although we did discuss like how we might turn it into something bigger, but it was just Lost in Space samples with some backwards drums that he had put together while I was visiting his family. And I think it could have been a musical, kind of a club dancey kind of song if a little more effort had gone into it. But as it so happened, that never happened. So really around this era, kind of around the Cakewalk era, close to when I stopped doing music for a long time, there was a post on one of the Microsoft bulletin boards about the group that made a space game called Allegiance, and they were wondering if anyone wanted to try and make songs, to in-source the songs for the games from employees to see what they came up with. And I just kind of, listened to some of the samples of what they were trying to do and came up with a little prototype tune. The guy liked it, and he said, well, we're looking for something different for the main title, but maybe we could use that somewhere, like the end, the credit scroller or something. But we never really did anything about that. So the file Allegiance was just a little tune that I made on my own that I think is not too bad. I was trying to give the notion of deep space in it, and me working alone, I don't really enjoy that with music, but that's something I did. And speaking of things that I just kind of did by myself that weren't necessarily that much of an investment, there was a program called Sonic Foundry Acid. I actually had bought stock in Sonic Foundry because I thought Acid was a good program and made some money on that, but then I lost some money on another stock, so I pretty much broke even because they got bought by Sony, and it was very promising. But it has been supplanted by Fruity Loops and Ableton Live and things like that. Basically, once they were bought by Sony, that killed them. And but it was a good program, and I was learning how to use it. Not very good at it. A lot of just taking samples and loops and putting them together. Not so much about the individual notes. The beats were generally not MIDI beats, like the ones that sound like they're from General MIDI. And I just quickly whipped up this song, and it wound up in a promotional video for intentional programming. Just like for a moment in the header and the credits. So that's just, it's not any kind of work of art, I'll tell you that. And really that was pretty much for a long time the end of my participation in music to any extent. I did, when I moved downtown, I took the instruments with me and I set them up. These days I would consider them more clutter than anything. I would have not had them out, given how I pretty much never used them. They were just props and kind of in the way. I certainly would have decorated differently than having that sort of on that wall. But that's hindsight here. And just got rid of the instruments. Eventually there weren't very many left, and eventually I didn't have much of anything left for various reasons. I just had to move on. It's a different video. But many years later, my parents did get me a present of a new keyboard that I could use with the computer that had a USB port and all that, because I didn't have any of the MIDI interfaces or whatever. And I ended up using that more as a headphone jack than anything, because it had a headphone amplifier in it. But I would periodically play on it and made a few songs, but this was much later, much later. So yeah, we are fast forwarding a bit now by like a decade, almost, to jump to where my next musical collaborator was my girlfriend Ellen, who I dated for about a year and some, and she had a background in audio for theater and worked for an audio company, and there she is in her office, surrounded by a bunch of things, because she did technical work with theater equipment that the company made. And I don't really remember how it was that we got to the point of deciding we were going to make a song, but I was a big fan of the Yip Yip Martians, who have a very hard problem in terms of trying to answer the phone. They're well-meaning and they want to communicate, but they're confused because they don't even understand to pick up the phone. They think the phone ringing is that the phone is talking to them. And I empathize with their good-natured intergalactic spirit of communication, yet still failing because they have a bad book. They are always referring to the book, and it never helps them. It's like it just has pictures of telephones and says like cow and chicken, or who knows. So we both liked the Yip Yips and decided to, I guess I played her some of my songs, and at some point we decided we were just hanging around where the keyboard was and perhaps had nothing else to do, I really don't remember, and decided to make a song. So we made a song called Earth Book, and we never really finished it. It was something we started in one night, and then I finished it for her birthday after we were no longer seeing each other. I sent it to her as a birthday present to say, hey, I finished this, because I have been for a while trying to put closure on all of my projects and all my files, and so I thought, well, it's too bad this never got finished. So I kind of took it to at least a point of completion where the song has a beginning, middle, and end. And now and again, I would load up the sequencer and do something, kind of interesting or modern, always feeling more frustrated with the tool than anything. In this case, this Genetique Moleculaire, Our Goal Is Not Speed song called Retrovirus was a response to like a challenge where it was just something I made like in an hour, of just tweaking some things together, because it was people discussing whether on Facebook, whether you could just pick any random news article and just grab phrases out of it. And someone proposed a French, like a French molecular genetics article, and I was taking phrases out of it, and could have made a joke song if someone wanted to come over and do it. And it's been that way for a while, where if someone really cared enough to want to make music, I could certainly help them. It's just that I don't have the inner drive. I just nothing in me wants to. I don't have a song. Like maybe I'll find one, but it's more if someone is if that's the way they want to play, then I'll play with them, and I can make it happen. I just don't have any particular goal. So I've got I make a bunch of little things, but I usually lose interest within a few minutes of even starting, because I'm mostly thinking about how bad the software is. That's overwhelming my enjoyment of the process. And so speaking about that fine line of motivation, I'd made some friends in Austin who were involved in running a club that kind of had fringish kind of nights. I guess I had experience with that with Nova Express and all that. But they had an 80s night, and they had a gothic industrial night. And so I was, like to hang out with the bartenders and the people who were going to be putting on the shows. And one guy had this idea to do a bad music night. And the concept was, hey, like, what if we actually deliberately played stuff that people would think is unpopular, but we tried to make it, a mix of just playing stuff that is uncool, but then combine it with remixes of things that you might think you wouldn't like, but then it's something that's been modernized, or you're kind of like, hey, that's funny, or that's new. And so very much like YouTube parties almost, when you go over to someone's house and it's like everybody's like wanting to play the next, oh, you got to hear this, or you got to see this, that instead of being so super serious, that it would be more about people playing things and like, oh, you got to see this, no, you got to see that. And to try and bring some of the people who might think that the general club culture isn't chatty enough, and that people aren't free enough about just being able to talk and be silly, that it might have a niche. And I thought that was a very good idea. It was called Yacht Club, and I think there was a winning idea in there if it had been done a little more, executed a little more tightly. But I came up with these flyers that I thought were great, where I would just kind of list some of the acts and make them look kind of silly, and had a formula for them, no cover, no shame, to try and build it up. And actually we got copied by another club in Austin that came up with their own bad night that kind of basically liked the idea and stole it. But I don't know if that lasted. our night didn't last so long. But one thing that I thought would be fun would be to actually debut songs, remixes of songs that people wouldn't know, and be the venue by which it would be known. So you would come and you might hear a new release of a weird viral hit, which was a concept that I don't know if anyone's done before. So to kick that off, I decided I was going to tackle Devastatin' Dave, Zip Zap Rap. And Devastatin' Dave got a claim to fame because his album cover for this Say No to Drugs song, Zip Zap Rock, is crack in the vernacular of the album. And so what I did is I remixed it and tried to make it sound good, which I actually think there were some bonuses to the song, so it was possible. But it involved a lot of what's called beat mapping. I had to take the kind of off beats in Dave's song and line them up and realign it, and recut the phrases to make it have a little bit more of a verse chorus sing song structure, so it had that song like rhythm, because he kind of meanders. And there are some other little scraps here and there, but I don't want us to turn into like a Beatles box set. Paul had bought the Beatles like entire box set and had like every scrap and every recording of everything they'd ever done, no matter how high they were or whatever. And at first he had told me, "Oh, you have to listen to the Beatles. They're the greatest, and they've everything they do is timeless." And then after listening to the entire box set, he came back and said, "All right, well, no, not if you actually listen to everything. You kind of have to." there's a curated set of things that the Beatles have done that is timeless, and it's not everything in this box. So certainly, if I ever rise to fame for some most likely non-musical reasons, there will not be much cause to study the scraps of things that I might have done, and most likely are just any good parts are probably made out of loops anyway. So let's not bother going there. I think that this is enough of an archive for us to look at. And if I ever make any more music, I'll be starting completely from scratch. But I don't know if I will, and this may be the end of it. So if so, I hope there's some kind of interesting story in here for at least the people with whom I interacted with at the times of making the music.